Hi, I'm Professor Melko, PhD chemist and your university chemistry professor. Today we're going to be talking about significant digits and rounding off. Imagine you're calculating something, the area of a circle, and you come up with this. 19.6349548. That's a lot of digits. How many of those digits do I keep? That's what we're going to learn about today, so let's jump into the lecture. Rounding off non-significant figures. There's a couple rules for rounding mentioned here on the lecture slide. First, you need to keep all the digits in your calculator until you get to the very end of the calculation. Okay, when you're getting ready to report your final answer, that's when you're going to actually round off and drop those non-significant figures. So we introduced sig figs last time in the previous video. Go back and watch that one if you haven't already. But you have to report a certain number of significant figures. So in your calculator, when you get this big long bunch of numbers, you're going to keep them, do all your calculations, and at the very end, then you drop some of the non-significant figures. Okay, the rule is as follows. If that first non-significant figure is less than 5, you drop all the digits. Okay, if that number is 5 or greater, then you round up the previous significant figure by 1. This is easier to see in action. So let's take a look here. Imagine your calculator shows this number 107.5324, and you need to report 5 significant figures. Okay, so I'm just going to count like we learned last time, left to right, the significant figures. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All 5 of those are significant. So this is sort of the dividing line here that separates significant from non-significant. But now I need to actually round this. Right, this first non-significant figure is a 2, so we drop all of the figures after it, including it. Those are all non-significant, and they get rounded off. So my final answer here is 107.53. Now imagine your calculator instead shows 2.8502. Again, we'll calculate from, or we'll move left to right here, and we need 2 sig figs. That's significant, so this is the dividing line here between significant and non-significant. But I consider this first non-significant figure. Is it 5 or greater? Yes. That means I jump back to the previous significant figure and round it up. So this 2.8 becomes 2.9. So those are the really straightforward rules for rounding and where to drop these non-significant figures. Now, sometimes you have to add in placeholder zeros, right? So imagine you have 183 rounded to 2 sig figs. Following what we just learned, the 1 is significant, the 8 is significant. You're tempted to drop this 3, that first non-significant figure, but if you do that, you'd be reporting 18 milliliters, okay, which is much smaller than 183. So in this instance, we have to actually add a 0. So in the rounding here, when we're dropping this non-significant figure, we instead replace it with a 0, and our answer becomes 180. That still has 2 significant figures, the 1 and the 8, because remember, these trailing zeros aren't counted as significant unless there's a decimal place after it. There is not, so the 0 is not significant, and there's still only 2 sig figs. Similarly, we can round this large number to 3 sig figs, getting rid of everything beyond and including that 4, just keeping the first 3 significant figures. But we can't just write 823 because that's a much smaller number, so we replace all those non-significant figures with zeros. Let's do some practice problems. So pause the video here and try to round off these to 3 significant figures each. Then I'll go ahead and solve them. So the first one here, 22.250, I'm just going to write this out again, counting left to right. The 2 is significant, the 2 is significant, the 2 is significant. Those are my first 3. Here's my dividing line. I have to look to this first non-significant figure. It's a 5 or greater, so I have to round up the previous number. So this becomes 22.3. Let's try the next one, 0.070038. This incorporates some of what we talked about last time with these leading zeros, okay? As I count left to right here, these leading zeros are never significant, so I'm not counting them as significant figures. Until I get to this first non-zero digit, the 7, that's significant. These trailing zeros are significant. because they're after a decimal place. And so this is the dividing line here. 7, 0, 0 are my significant figures. I look at the first non-significant figure, 3, that's below 5, so I just drop. I don't have to worry about rounding up a previous number here. And so this becomes 0.0700. As a check, this still has 3 significant figures. I've rounded it appropriately. Finally, let's look at the last one here, 34,439. Counting left to right, the 3 is significant, the 4 is significant, the 4 is significant. So here is my dividing line. This 3 is less than 5, so I drop these numbers, but I can't just write 344. That's a much smaller number than the thousands that I started with. So I replace these non-significant numbers with zeros here, trailing zeros. So this becomes 34,400. Okay, hopefully that helped. This is just a short video on rounding. You can watch the next video where we'll get into addition and subtraction, multiplication and division, and how that affects rounding. You can go back and watch the previous video if you haven't already on significant figures. And as always, you can subscribe to the channel and catch me on Twitch weekly where I do office hours and talk science news. See you next time.